It was never fear, nor was it shame. It was a choice, conscious, raw, heavy. For 60 years, I wore my silence like part of the uniform. I learned to smile with my lips while clenching my teeth inside. Out here, everyone saw the same man, the veteran, the father who taught his grandkids to chop firewood, who woke up early even with knee pain, who left the rocking chair only to pour more coffee. The man who, at 4th of July ceremonies, wore his veteran's cap with dignity and waved discreetly when someone said, "Thank you for your service." They thought I was made of honor. Little did they know I was made of weight, a kind of burden that doesn't show up on an X-ray. I learned to tell just enough: the smell of sand, the muffled sound of helicopters, the letter that never arrived on time. I shared what hurt little. The rest I buried, not in a drawer. I buried it inside me, like someone who digs a grave and returns home pretending nothing was left behind at the burial. The truth is, my silence spared many people pain, but it left me alone. And now, with thinner skin, shorter breath, and time growing ever more impatient, the loneliness of this secret no longer settles as it once did. It hurts, it burns, it whispers in the early hours, and for the first time I listened. I can't carry this alone anymore, because no one who truly loves me deserves to inherit only half of who I was, and no one who carries my last name deserves to grow up thinking courage is staying silent forever. Time, as it passes, sharpens absences and dulls some pains, but certain memories only grow more vivid with the years. In the routine of the house, small rituals gave me a false sense of normalcy: the sound of coffee brewing, the smell of warm bread, the distant hum of the TV, always tuned to the news, as if the world needed monitoring, even from afar. My children came over on weekends, bringing noisy, curious grandkids, filling the living room with questions and laughter. They looked at me like one admires a rock, steady, unshakable, a living piece of family history, and I tried to live up to that image. I spoke of simple things: the weather, the price of goods, the memories I could share without my voice trembling. But inside, every encounter chipped away at my mask. My grandkids' eyes, so clear, sought in me not just answers about the past, but permission to dream of the future. And sometimes I felt a small, sharp shame, like someone afraid of disappointing before even being found out. One of those Sunday afternoons, after everyone had left and the house breathed its heavy silence, I sat in the corner armchair and let my eyes wander to the bookshelf. I saw the old box marked by years, where I kept medals, commendations, yellowed letters, and a photograph always tucked beneath the others. That box was my survival capsule and my prison. Sometimes at night I opened it alone just to feel the physical weight of the past. I ran my fingers over the objects as if each could absolve me of what I hadn't told. But with every touch, I also felt the risk of someone one day opening that box without my permission and discovering that behind the hero there was a man at war with himself. And that was exactly what began to rob me of sleep. Knowing time was running out, and that silence, if not broken now, could become an impassable wall between me and those I love most. It was in the simplest gesture that the wall of my silence began to crack. My youngest grandson, Ben, found the box. I hadn't left it out. It was high on the shelf, in a corner forgotten by those always rushing, but he climbed a chair, looking for an old board game, and ended up finding much more than he should have. When I noticed, he was already sitting on the living room floor with the lid open, carefully spreading the papers on the rug, as if handling museum relics. His eyes gleamed with the excitement of someone who thought he was uncovering a piece of American history, and in a way, he was. I sat beside him slowly, as if the weight in my spine was merely physical. He pointed to a specific photo, one I always hid last, with hesitant fingers and a curious voice. "Grandpa, who's this man here with you? He's wearing the same uniform, But this place doesn't look like any of the ones you've talked about. I swallowed hard. My throat closed at the same old spot. The photo showed more than faces. It showed the date, the place, and the look of the man beside me. Someone who never came back. Someone I left behind. Someone whose name I never uttered in front of my family. I took the photo from his hand, with the care of someone picking up a sharp shard. I smiled reflexively, but the smile didn't reach my eyes. He noticed. Kids notice. He stood up without protest, as if he knew he'd touched something still alive, even after so many years buried. I put everything back in the box, but what I really wanted was to lock it all inside me again, except it wouldn't work anymore. That lid, now, didn't close as it once did. It wasn't the box that had changed. It was me. That night I dreamed of the desert, of the smell of gunpowder, of the voice of the man in the photograph calling my name, one I'd almost forgotten. I woke up in a cold sweat, my mouth dry, my hands trembling. I sat on the edge of the bed for hours, staring into the dark, feeling the weight of it all grow. And that's when I understood. Time wasn't just carrying me away, it was pushing me in the right direction. Because a secret only dies with us when we choose not to live fully, and I still wanted to live, even if just to tell the truth, one single time. It was the next morning that I started writing, not with haste, nor with clarity. My hand trembled, the pen faltered, and the words took time to come because they no longer wanted to be neat. They wanted to be real. I took an old hardcover notebook, one I'd been given years ago and never used. On the first page, I wrote only his name, James Rowley, and just below, a sentence that hurt more than any combat wound. He died believing. In me, it wasn't the first time I'd tried. For years, I kept scattered phrases on scraps of paper, tore up letters never sent, hid words like they were grenades about to explode in my chest. But that morning, it was different. It was as if time had finally granted me permission to remember. To remember without filtering, without reducing. To remember not just as a soldier, but as a human being. And so I wrote. I wrote about the desert, about the mission, about the night we received orders to attack a village suspected of harboring insurgents. I wrote about the screams on the radios, the error in reading the maps, the doubt in James's eyes. And I wrote at last about the choice I made when we said no, because yes, we said no. We refused to advance. The terrain wasn't safe, the intelligence was unclear, and there were too many civilians to call it a target. James followed me, and that sealed his fate. Hours later, during an emergency withdrawal, he was hit while covering our rear. He would die with a clear conscience, but I would live with his blood on my hands, because I convinced him to disobey. This truth, raw and untamed, is what shaped me ever since. Not the glory of medals, not the anthems played at funerals, but this memory, his look before he fell, the last "Go, I'll catch up," he shouted, the silence that followed, and the moment I returned home, decorated for bravery, for something that, at its core, was an act of rebellion and loss. No one here knows this. Not even my wife knew, not my children. To everyone, James was just another name on the memorial, but to me, he was the piece that never came back. And now, seeing my grandson open that box with such small hands, I realized that maybe I'm being called, not by remorse, but by responsibility. I survived, and that makes me the keeper of his memory, and of everything no one had the courage to tell. The words began to flow faster, as if they'd waited all these years to finally find paper. With each filled page, I felt the weight in, my chest shift. It didn't lessen, but it stopped being suffocation and became space, a space where pain could breathe. I started writing every day early in the morning before the house woke up. I revisited the memory like walking through a minefield, with care, with reverence, with my heart on tiptoe. But writing was one thing, speaking was another. Every time I thought about calling my children to talk, the silence loomed large again. I rehearsed entire speeches in front of the mirror, imagined possible reactions, pictured their looks, and each scenario felt riskier than the war itself, because telling the truth now meant accepting that everything I'd built on the image they had of me could crumble. And more than that, it meant facing Ben's gaze, that boy with clear eyes, and seeing the shadow of doubt in them. Could I bear it? But time, that old enemy now accompanying me as a daily reminder, no longer gives me many options. I feel it in my joints, in the pauses my body takes without warning, in the forgetfulness that grows more frequent. The pen slips from my hand, my speech falters, my breathing needs more calm. And for that very reason, I started leaving clues. A notebook in the bottom drawer, a letter on the desk, an incomplete conversation with my daughter just to test the ground. "Dad, is everything okay?" she asked. And I said yes, as I always did, but my eyes couldn't sustain the lie. She noticed, and she left slowly, like someone respecting a grief that still has no name. That night I opened the box again, but this time I took the photograph and left it on the table. I looked at that face that's haunted me for 60 years and whispered, "I think it's time." Not as someone asking for forgiveness, but as someone preparing to honor. Because James died for a principle, and I survived without the courage to defend it until now. It wasn't a big scare, but it was enough. I woke up on the bedroom floor, not remembering how I got there. The sun was already streaming through the windows when I managed to get up, my body heavier than ever. The pain was subtle, but the weakness, that was screaming. When my daughter arrived for her usual visit, she noticed before I said anything. She took me to the hospital almost without exchanging words. And there, as the tests piled up and the doctor's looks grew more cautious, I understood that time was no longer a line. It was a period approaching. There was no frightening diagnosis, but the message was clear. It was now or never. On the way home, I didn't speak in the car, but the notebook came with me, under my arm, like a soldier carries a folded flag, with respect, with gravity. That night, I waited until everyone was together, my 2 sons, my daughter, and Ben, who came running to hug my legs, as he always did. I asked them to sit with me, and just seeing their faces turned toward me, I felt an emotion as old as the first day of combat. Because what I was about to face was, of all battles, the most intimate, and perhaps the hardest. It took me a while to start. My voice faltered at first, but then it came, not as a speech nor as a confession, but as truth. I told them it wasn't easy for me to talk about what happened in the war. I said that for many years I carried an incomplete story, shaped to not scare, to protect. I told them about James, about the mission, about the refusal, about his death, about the silence. I told everything without hiding the tremors, without masking the flaws, and when I finished, the world didn't collapse. No one shouted, no one turned their back on me. My eldest son lowered his eyes, holding back tears. My daughter came to me and just held my hand so tightly it hurt, and it was that pain that made me feel alive. Ben, still confused, came to me and sat on my lap. "Was he your best friend?" he asked. And I, with eyes full, could only answer, "He was more than that." And there, in that simple room, surrounded by the people I inherited and the truths I hid, I felt that for the first time, I was whole. After I spoke, something changed in the air of the house. It wasn't something you hear. It was something you feel, like when the storm passes and you realize you were breathing tensely without noticing. My children started looking at me differently, not with less respect, but with more humanity, as if the hero they'd invented had finally become real. They understood, each in their own way, that my silence wasn't a wall of pride, but a trench of pain. And deep down, I think they even wondered how someone can live so long with a name stuck in their chest without letting the chest break. The truth is, I didn't manage it. It broke, but now it was rebuilding. Ben especially stayed closer. He looked at me with a kind of curiosity that had nothing childish about it. It was as if he wanted to learn with attentive eyes what it means to be a real man. And one day, while helping me sweep leaves in the yard, he said, "Grandpa, can I put your friend's name in my school project?" My throat tightened instantly, but I managed to nod. "He deserves to be remembered," I said, "and not just for dying, but for the kind of courage he had." And in that simple, quiet moment, I realized James's memory was no longer trapped in me. It was alive and free in the next generation. The nights grew lighter, the dreams less frequent, and when they came, they weren't screams anymore. They were calm scenes, as if my subconscious had forgiven me too. I started attending the veterans' meetings again. One of them pulled me aside and said, "I heard the story about James. You did what no one had the courage to do." I didn't ask how he knew, and it didn't matter, because deep down I knew that telling wasn't just freeing my family, it was also freeing myself from that battlefield, where my body came back whole, but my soul stayed wounded for years. Life, after the truth, took on a different temperature. It didn't get easier, it got more honest. And that, for someone who lived decades under layers of silence, is already a victory. My days remained simple. Tea in the morning, a short walk, small repairs around the house, news on the TV. But everything had a new flavor. Even the things that used to hurt started to have a new lightness. It was as if every detail of the routine said, "Now you can live in peace." I started talking more. Not just about the war, but about everything. I talked about my poor childhood, about the letters I never sent, about the fear of failing as a father, even trying so hard. My children, now adults, grew closer in a way I never imagined. It wasn't that distant reverence anymore that called me hero, with a respectful shine, but some unfamiliarity. Now it was different. It was companionship. It was sharing. One day, my eldest son, the most reserved of all, said as he left the porch, "Dad, I think now I really know you, and that makes me proud, not for winning battles, but for having the courage to lose the silence." The people in town also started seeing me with less mythical and more human eyes. They invited me to tell my story at a school. I declined the first time, accepted the second. I spoke calmly, without embellishing, without hiding. I told it like a man speaks when he no longer wants to impress anyone, just leave something useful behind. I talked about James, about choice, about consequence. At the end, a girl asked me, "If you could go back, would you do it differently?" And I answered, "Yes, I would have told sooner." And that's when I realized my life could still be useful, not as a symbol, but as a warning, as a beacon, as living proof that what goes unsaid also sickens, and that the truth, even when it hurts, is the only thing that saves. I can't say exactly when I started saying goodbye. It wasn't sudden. It was like a tide slowly receding, revealing the stones that were there all along, some smooth, others still sharp. My steps grew shorter, my vision blurrier. But my heart, that was clearer than ever. For the first time, I felt I'd returned from the battlefield complete, because now it wasn't just my body that had come back, it was my soul too. The days were full of small blessings that you only recognize after aging with clarity. A hot cup of tea served without me asking, Ben's laughter echoing through. The yard, the smell of the newspaper in the morning, and the comfortable silence between me and my daughter as she tended the garden. I no longer needed fancy words or to hide my frailty. My grandson started coming every Saturday with his notebook and new questions. How did you know you were doing the right thing? he asked once, and I, without hesitating, answered, "You don't know." But when something brings you peace inside, even if the whole world doubts it, it's because you listened to the most honest part of you. And so I left traces. Typewritten letters with my full story, photos with notes on the back, small slips tucked into objects that once held silence. I wanted to leave everything in order, not as a hero needing reverence, but as a man who wants to be remembered whole, with his glories and fears, his triumphs and wounds. I wanted them to know I was flawed, but I tried. That it hurt, but I loved. That I survived, but a part of me stayed behind to tell, and chose to do so, finally. When the time came, I was at home. Nothing solemn, nothing grandiose. Just me, my children, the sound of the wind outside, and the notebook Ben held with care, as if he knew it now carried more than paper. I felt no fear, nor regret. Just a deep calm like the end of a long patrol, and when I closed my eyes for the last time, I felt, with my soul finally light, that the mission was complete. I was 12 when my grandfather told me the truth, not with rehearsed phrases, but with his soul open. At the time, I didn't understand everything, but I understood the main thing. Courage wasn't just what you do in war. It was what you do after it, when silence weighs more than any weapon. I grew up hearing he was a hero, but only after he was gone did I realize that his greatest act of heroism wasn't surviving. It was finally telling what he kept inside. Today, I'm an adult, and I carry James Rowley's name tattooed not on my skin, but in the choices I make. I became a history teacher, and when I talk about wars, about moral decisions, about the human cost of silence, it's him I see, my grandfather, sitting on the porch, with steady eyes and fragile hands, but with a whole heart, because in the end, he chose not to leave as an enigma. The last thing he gave me was a letter, inside a single underlined sentence. Truth told in time becomes legacy. And I understood. That was my role now, to not let his story die with him.